Greetings and salutations, everyone. Before I get on today's topic, I just first want to say that there was a good hour's worth of this drawing that failed to get recorded due to technical difficulties. Essentially, the entirety of Alder's finished line art and the fixing of fables couldn't make it into the video. I do apologize. Now, with that out of the way, let's discuss how to start writing your own book. It's a frequent question that's asked me by beginning authors, and so here I am with a detailed explanation. I do work and structure my stories a bit differently than others, and I should note that I have not gone to college to learn any of this. Not every method works for every person, so keep that in mind as you listen. First, you need to choose a genre. Your book will likely fall into several genres, and that's okay, but you should know where the focus is heavier. Next issue of concern is your characters. Before we even start the outline or figure out the plot, you need some main characters. I find that the plot of your story will naturally start to fill itself in as you create your protagonist, side buddies, and villain. It's easier to design a fictional person and loose backstories that build a skeleton for your story than it is to create a whole plot of events in your head from nothing. Let's touch on some of the do's and don'ts of character making, since we're on the topic. A more detailed video on this topic will be made later though. Do not make your main character your braver and prettier self. Make someone unique who might not believe or perceive everything the same way you do. Get someone who comes from a different past than you. It's tempting for all beginner writers to insert themselves into the book so the character can achieve all the things they personally couldn't in the real world. It's called the wish fulfillment character. Readers pick up on this real quick, and it takes them right out of the story. Do not make your main character a Mary Sue or Gary Sue, being the perfect fictional character with unrealistic abilities, with all the skills, powers, smarts, wits, while also being good at everything. Yes, your story needs to follow someone interesting, but if you fuse Sherlock and Son Goku together, not only is it going to seem unbelievable and over the top, it's also going to get boring because there's nowhere for your character to grow and threats and villains just won't seem menacing enough. There's no sense of danger and you'll fail to capture the reader's interest. Your character needs to have flaws and weaknesses. You decide what kind and how big and small. Where they lack, feel free to add another character to fill in that gap. Do not make a shit ton of characters. Just don't. Especially in the beginning. If you're introducing 10 plus main characters all within the first few paragraphs, it's frustrating for the readers. It's way too much information and they don't know where to focus. They're wondering where the hell the plot is because you're using the first pages solely for character names and descriptions. Not only that, but they simply won't retain the information. Your characters might be interesting to you personally, but not the readers if you dump them all in at once. My suggestion is starting out with 1 to 4 main characters max. You have time to add in more later, but the readers need a chance to learn and attach themselves to a small number first. Be diverse when making characters. It's boring when everyone has the same personality, but don't just make them diverse, make them believable and practical. If you need a shy character and a contrasting angry character, don't make them so overdramatically shy and angry that the reader sense you're trying way too hard to achieve diversity. This is a book, not a cartoon. Your characters can't be so irrational in the personality just to prove that they're different from the rest. Don't make your villains arbitrarily evil. Give them a purpose and a credible reason to be the way they are. So they want world destruction? Why? They want to slaughter a nation? Why? Because they're simply bad people and that's what bad people do? No. Make them relatable in some way. Make the readers understand the villains. You only need to come up with a portion of each person's backstory. The rest will fill itself in later as you write. You don't need to have your whole character's past figured out right away. All you need to start is a physical appearance and the personality. Don't get me wrong, it helps to know as much information in the beginning as possible so that there's less to edit later, but don't sweat it too much. When describing your characters in a book, try to mix it up and don't draw it out with insane detail. With that said, don't skip on the details. Books with zero physical descriptions of anyone or anything are frustrating. And don't come at me with the "I leave it to the reader's imagination" bullshit. It's lazy writing. A full-length paragraph will do just fine for a main character, and a sentence or two for minor people. If following the physical appearance is a short background story on the same character, try to keep that at a single paragraph as well unless it's key to moving the plot forward in that instance. Here's a helpful tip to keep yourself and your characters organized. Write down all your characters' names, ages, and backstories on a separate document, as well as the names of locations and other things of importance. Keep it brief and simple. It'll definitely help you if you need to recall specific information about someone, and save you from having to reread several chapters in search of it. This is not a draft of your book, this is a memory sheet, and trust me, you'll need it. Okay, up next is your setting. What time period is your book in, and from what world? Is it modern era planet Earth? If not, this can dictate how you write and what words you can use. If your setting is ancient Egypt, you can't use modern terminology. Your vocabulary is going to be significantly different and therefore harder to write. This also means you're likely going to need to do a lot of research on ancient Egypt to get an accurate description. You risk running into the same terminology issue when your setting is in a different world. If a human is whisked away to another planet, you have to take language into consideration. Though it's easier to assume all aliens across the galaxy speak fluent English, it might not be completely realistic. If you choose a brand new realm outside of Earth, also take into consideration that you'll need to do a whole lot of describing of scenery, architecture, and technology. This might be exciting for some who love to create their own worlds, but it's more work than you might realize at first. World building is a tedious craft to properly portray in your book. This is also a topic that could use its own video, but let me run through a quick few things to map out in your head or on paper before you start. Politics and legal system. Are they relevant to your character's journey, and how do they operate in the world of your story? Religion. What's the common religion of the people and how do they practice it? How does it influence the politics, laws, and morals of the realm? Rules of magic. If your story involves magic or other supernatural elements, you need to know the rules before you even touch the subject. Otherwise, you'll probably fail to establish a magical system that the readers can understand. If the rules aren't clear in the writing itself, readers don't know the limitations or the consequences, so you're less likely to wow them or keep them on edge when something exciting should be happening. Technology. It's important to know what kind of technology is available in your setting and to stay consistent. Some people like to mix magic, modern technology, and ancient contraptions together, and it doesn't always end well. Like clocks, computers, and airships exist, but not cars or cell phones. Climate, geography, language, ethics, gender roles, fashion, architecture, and many other things need to be thought about and carefully considered before you start. There are other elements of world building that I haven't mentioned, but we'll touch on another day. Please also understand that even if you have every minute detail of the world you've built mapped out, doesn't mean it has to be included in the book, especially in the same detail. Yes, know your information so you don't break your own rules and it's easy for you to create a convincing new world, but always ask yourself if it's relevant to the story. Perspective is the next topic of consideration. You have two choices, first or third person perspectives. There are pros and cons to both, and it's up to you to figure out what you're most comfortable with. Pros of first person. Intimacy between the reader and the main character. You feel like the character is speaking directly to you. You get inside their head and learn their sense of humor and thought process. Events seem more real. You can get a clear portrayal of events. It's easier to avoid pronoun frustration. Instead of spamming a name, he, she, or it, you can just say I. This is mostly in reference when there are multiple people in the same scene and you want to avoid as much confusion as possible. When you're in a room full of males without names, it's extremely difficult to differentiate between all of them when they speak or take action because the only pronouns you really have are he or him. Cons of first person. You're limited to just one person and you can't show what's happening outside of their life or perspective. Readers can tire of just one person's voice. You run the risk of too much inner dialogue and monologuing. The temptation to put yourself as the main character is high. Do not do this. Pros of third person. Omniscient perspective. The narrator knows all and can move anywhere in the story and can cover any characters including the villains. You can learn things the main character doesn't know and see the entirety of the plot. Cons of third person. Less intimacy between the reader and the main character. It's all show and tell and very limited emotional connection. Temptation to jump around too much and lose focus of your main characters. Along with perspective, you also need to know if you're writing past or present tense. The choice is solely based on your preference. You'll have readers who hate present tense, readers who are indifferent, and readers who only read in present tense. Target audience is our next topic. Who are you writing for? Kids, teenagers, young adults, or old adults? You can't appeal to them all. If you want to swear in your books, you've automatically geared your novels for an older audience. If this is the case, then you need to write maturely too. You need to use bigger vocabulary, be more descriptive, and not only use young characters. Adults don't want to just read about middle schoolers. The main thing I want to stress in this is vocabulary. Your age, maturity level, education, and lack of creativity become blatantly obvious to readers when you repeat the same words over and over. The English language is vast, and odds are there are multiple ways to say something. If you find yourself using the same descriptive term multiple times in the same page or paragraph, please find yourself a thesaurus. Don't overuse curse words either. If you're saying fuck in every single sentence, this also takes the reader out of your story and they're less likely to take it seriously. Okay, here's the hard part which tends to stump everyone: the plot. Do not stress or worry about figuring out every detail about your plot. The complexity of the plot usually only comes to me as I write. Yes, you want a clear goal for your characters, but how exactly they achieve their hopes and dreams is a different matter. Let me stress this again. The main objective needs to be clear, very clear. Readers need to know what the plot is at a basic level, but the rest doesn't necessarily need to be mapped out in your outline. I often write with the character's goal in mind, but I'm not entirely sure how they're going to get there. I don't treat my characters like plot devices to get from point A to point B. I let their personalities and interactions guide me in a way that feels realistic and authentic. If they won't naturally go to a place where I need them, then I manipulate the situation, not their personality. Sometimes I create plot points as I write that I'm unsure of what to do with yet, and sometimes I end up tying it in with the main plot, other times I have to go back and edit it out because it served me no purpose. If you couldn't tell already, I don't outline my story or chapters, I just write. This means my editing process is extensive later, but I'm okay with that. This writing system does not work for everyone. I don't do well with pre-planning because I feel like that gives me less freedom for creativity once the writing process happens. Yes, I draft in my head, but nothing is set in stone because my characters consistently make decisions that change the outcome of pre-planned events. Some people say you need to start with an ending and work backwards to make your story, but never in my life have I come up with an ending to my series when I'm in the beginning stages of my book. I rarely have a title until I'm about midway either. If you figure out an ending and a title when you brainstorm your plot, awesome, but otherwise don't stress over it. Pick a plot with something that interests you and you have a basic understanding of. Stopping production midway to do hours upon hours of research can be exasperating. Yeah, a book about dragons, castles, kings, queens, and wars might sound fun, but if you don't like writing about politics or battle tactics, then you might want to rethink your overall plot to something simpler. It's hard to avoid cliche storylines these days because it feels like everything has been done before, but it's not impossible to take a generic idea and make it your own. If you manage to make unique, likable characters, morphing a generic plot into something spectacular isn't difficult. Alright, let's get into the actual writing of this book, starting with your opening scene. Making your opening scene great and exhilarating is imperative. If you bore the readers with the first page, they're very likely to put the book down because they'd rather not risk wasting their time sticking with a dull novel. Starting your book out with nothing but exposition, the history of your realm, and the politics is an awful idea. It's okay if it's just a paragraph or two, but anything past that is a snore fest. You have time to give the entirety of the history later. Do it in increments and don't shove it all the readers all at once. It's the same problem with having too many characters. It's too much information to soak in. You can't expect them to memorize names of so many people and places on such short notice. Do not wait too long for exposition, however. No one appreciates having to wait till the midway point before figuring out exactly what the plot is about. Start with an adventure, action sequence, or something witty. Capture their attention with something stimulating. It needs to be something different that they've never read before. Your opening paragraph needs to immediately hook the reader. Avoid cliches at all costs. Do not have flashbacks unless it's imperative and doesn't interrupt the scene with action, specifically if it's something brief. I suggest cutting the idea of flashbacks completely out of your work. If you need to give readers information about the past, have one character tell it to another. If you're writing in first person, you can actually just have the main character tell the readers when it's relevant. Seriously, trust me, no one appreciates flashbacks or dream scenes. No one. Give the scenery description at least a paragraph. It doesn't need to be big, especially if your characters are starting in some place simple like a school. Don't leave the setting blank for too long, but again, don't spend pages describing just one thing. There's a balance you need to find within the physical descriptions of scenery and people, characters, thoughts, inner monologues, action, and dialogue. Depending on the kind of story, focus, and what your strong points are, the balance is going to be different for everyone. Every writer has a unique voice, and it sometimes takes a while to perfect that voice. There's nothing wrong with trying to mimic the voice and style of another author, without plagiarism, of course. Your personal touch and voice will present itself to you eventually if you practice enough. It doesn't matter how well you write the first draft, it still needs editing later. Don't think that just because you moved on to the next chapter that something from the previous can't be changed. You're welcome to go back and change it right away to fit the continuity of what you're writing now, but I typically like to write in a linear path. I'll make a literal note of which specific thing needs alteration in which chapter, and then keep moving forward. If I go back, I'm tempted to make extensive edits, and then I'll be stuck in the same place instead of focusing on finishing my draft. Getting past the first few chapters is the hardest part, while also keeping your own interest and motivation to keep writing. People tend to hit writer's block at chapter 3, but once you force yourself through, odds are you're going to stick with the series and see it through to the end. Just pace yourself and don't expect to see progress done every day. A lot of authors take a year or more to publish a single book. Let your imagination guide you through, and fun should ensue. Well, it's about time to wrap this up. If you're interested in commissioning me, please send me a note on my DeviantArt page or shoot me an email. If you'd like to make a discussion topic suggestion, head on over to my Patreon. Commissioning me gives you one free speed drawing topic of your choice, but keep in mind that discussions of religion and politics are a no-go for me. Unfortunately, I did not record enough content to cover the entirety of this video, so enjoy the music. And as always, thanks for listening and watching everyone, and I'll see you next time on Ebony Clock Creations.